OK, Rachel, what have you got for us?
This is a question from Tom, who asks, why are Tory MPs who are landlords allowed to water down legislation designed to protect renters? Why is this not seen as a conflict of interest?
OK, this is really interesting because this is something that came up when we were speaking to Barry Gardiner, the Labour MP who's been campaigning to scrap leasehold. He said that one of the reasons why it's been decades of fighting for reform that hasn't come to fruition was because of people in the House of Lords who had interest in the leasehold system, didn't he? And so there is this, proven record of politicians' private interest dictating the way that they vote on legislation that affects the population.
Yeah, he basically said that all of the major landowners who benefit from the leasehold system, like a fair few of them happen to be in the House of Lords. Yeah. But this is really relevant for the renters reform bill and this Michael Gove's government's attempt to make it a bit safer and easier to rent, better regulated, particularly to ban no-fault evictions. And yeah, it is worth noting that there are an awful lot of Tory MPs, awful lot of MPs in general, who are landlords. So from data last year, nearly 1 in 5 Conservative MPs are landlords. That's 68 of them, 87 MPs in total, so quite a few others as well. And specifically on rental reform, 47 Conservative backbenchers signed amendments to try and gut the renters bill and take out all of those protections. And of that, a third were landlords. So they were disproportionately represented in the opposition to this legislation. And I think you would see that even more if it had been a Labour bill. Obviously, this was a Conservative government trying to put forward this legislation and facing real resistance from Conservative MPs in doing that. I think there are probably quite a few, once you start thinking about it, issues where MPs might have a conflict of interest. So anything to do with tax changes, like MPs are generally better paid. And especially if you look at things like capital gains tax, dividends, inheritance tax, that's another massive one that we talk about, how inheritance tax affects like a very, very small proportion of estates, around about 4 or 5%. Probably MPs, through virtue of being MPs, are more likely to be considering estate planning than the average member of the public. And a higher top rate of tax. I mean, MPs, by definition of their salaries, are in the top 10% of earners. And anything also to do with pension reforms, to do with a company investment. In fact, like once you start thinking about it, there are quite a lot of areas. Also, you could do it the other way. And one of the criticisms that is often made of Rishi Sunak's cabinet, and also like Boris Johnson's cabinet, was making decisions, particularly sort of during COVID, about childcare and schools when their experience, even if they had children, was not the experience of most working parents. So a kind of lack of understanding about how the laws they are making might affect ordinary members of the public. I'm not answering the question. I'm just saying that it's a lot broader than just landlords. So yes, it's not just sort of this conflict of interest over tenants' rights. It's over things that may be overrepresented by politicians, not just Conservative ones, in Parliament. But property does seem to be one of those sort of hot button issues. I think at least 10% of donations received by the Tory party since 2010 have come from property developers, real estate and others connected with the construction industry. That's from a Guardian analysis recently. And that, I think, is, often evoked by people who are campaigning for tenants' rights, campaigning for leasehold reform, campaigning for, building more social housing, reining in some of the developers as a reason why, this kind of structural change can't happen. I'm sure that's come up with the people that you've been speaking to, Rachel, on these housing issues. There is sort of a slight whiff of injustice there, I think, in the way that the system works. Definitely. And one of the reasons that there is some optimism around a Labour government being able to push through planning reform, which the Conservatives have been trying to do but have been sort of blocked by their own party, is that Labour, while I'm sure faces all kinds of conflict of interest in other areas, on this particular one is less beholden to developers, landlords, and therefore there'll still be a lot of resistance to it. And Labour, if they get a big majority, will say, tough, we're doing it anyway, and will be able to do that because they're not facing that resistance from within their own party. But in answer to the question, why are they allowed to? Parliament doesn't have a system for MPs recusing themselves and saying, well, actually, I personally benefit from this, so I'm not going to vote on it. I mean, an MP could choose to abstain on personal moral grounds, But no, the way our system works is once you're in Parliament, you can vote for whatever you want, for whatever reasons you want, and you sort of take the consequences of that.
Yeah, and you don't have to recuse yourself if you're a landlord from voting on legislation that could impact landlords.